G'day folks, it's Mike Taylor here. I'm here at Fish and Feather where I'm currently working, and for the last 34 years I've spent working as a zookeeper at Hillsville Sanctuary where I ran the reptile house. But besides those 34 years working with reptiles professionally, I've also been keeping a variety of reptiles for many years, and one of my favourites currently, and a species of lizard that I've kept for most of the last 6 or 7 years and have bred pretty much constantly for the last few years, is the pink tongue lizard, or pink tongue skink. And probably a lizard that's not as well known as a lot of the more stock standard lizards like the blue tongues. You might not see this as your average pet lizard, but not true. It's a little bit different to a lot of other things, and we'll go through some of the things that make this lizard quite unique. It is a lizard that, with the right amount of handling, particularly while it's still young, the lizard I've got here in my hand at the minute is now just 12 months old, and I've got some newborns actually that I can show you as well in a moment. But even at this age, not too late to get them accustomed to handling. And because I always feed them in a tub outside of their enclosure, because they are messy eaters, being a snail and slug eater, I'm handling them every time I feed them, and the adults that I maintain at home are actually very easy to handle. They don't really grow much larger in length than your average blue tongue. It's just that they're nowhere near the bulk of a blue tongue. So a very slender bodied lizard. They're also nocturnal by nature. However, in a captive environment, they do very much adjust to a diurnal existence, particularly if you're always in the habit of feeding them during the daytime, which I am certainly at home. Because I'm handling them during the day, they're offered their food only during the daylight hours, and mine are often just waiting for me to pick them up and put them in their feeding tub and feed them their snails and slugs. And of course, it is snails and slugs that is their natural diet. Obviously, in their home range, in the subtropical and temperate rainforests ranging from the central New South Wales coast into to southeast Queensland, they'd come across a range of native snails. However, they do thrive on the European garden snail. This species might be difficult to maintain if you live in an area where there are no such thing, particularly across the top end. Areas very dry, where the European garden snail doesn't exist. We do have some native snails in Australia that produce very hard shells and are very large, that would be beyond the capabilities of the pink tongue from consuming. Now, if you're ever in those sort of situations, or even living down here in Melbourne, if you're having trouble finding snails and slugs, there is always the option of feeding them things like pinky mice, and also a selection of cat food, commercial tin cat food. A lot of keepers of this species maintain their pink tongues on that, but as a rule, I always encourage people to go out of their way to maintain them on slugs and snails. That is their natural food. But don't bother about offering them crickets, no chopping up greens or carrots and all that sort of stuff. They will not touch it. Wasting your time, wasting your money with snails and slugs is not going to cost you a cent. So in that regard, they're really handy to keep. They're an arboreal lizard, so you want an enclosure that's got a little bit more height to it rather than a cage that's got greater length rather than depth. And some of the units that I have behind me here, these terrariums right behind me. Now these measure 45 by 45 by 60 centimetres. This would be probably the minimum size that I would recommend for, and even then it would just be a single pink tongue. You would need something a bit larger than that for at least a pair of pink tongues. I keep these lizards with angle-headed dragons, and I've got an enclosure that is pretty much roughly about 1 metre tall. So given that the two species that I keep together are both arboreal, but pink tongues are also a live-bearing lizard, like your blue tongues, and their litter sizes are phenomenal. Now, I've bred my pair for the last 3 years, and I'll show you some little bubs that are in fact only days old as we speak, and they've just arrived from a litter of 21. And my female has given birth to that number in each of the 3 years that I've been breeding her. So I'm just going to put this little tacker away, and I'll just show you what these amazingly beautiful lizards look like when they are first born. They're really quite spectacular when they are bubs, and I hope that you can actually see that. But really amazing, and those markings tend to not be as striking once they get a bit older, as you would have seen from the 12-month-old animal. But so this little lizard is all of 4 or 5 days of age, and already devouring little snails and slugs. You do need to put in a bit of effort to find the smaller snails or the tiny little slugs that these little guys will get down. But once again, as I said, even at this size, even if you cut a pinky mouse in half, this little fellow would eat that, and certainly it would probably tuck into a dish of the commercial cat food. But I've already got them on the little snails, and they do quite well out of that. Now, I mentioned before their natural habitat is at least subtropical, if not temperate rainforest. They do require a higher relative humidity, certainly much higher than things like bearded dragons, obviously, which a dampish substrate, and even just spraying them every few days will maintain a relatively high humidity. It's really important that you do that. A dry environment tends to lead to skin issues. That's probably covers the major components of keeping pink tongue lizards. Now, in terms of UV, this might sound a bit controversial, but in theory, pink tongues will possibly even be okay under artificial light. Now, I have them in an enclosure that has UV, but that is primarily because I've got ankle-headed dragons in there as well. Where I worked as a zookeeper, we had them in our Nocturnal house for a period of time in an exhibit with totally artificial light, and the lizards, given their diet of snails, there was never ever any hint of metabolic bone disease in these lizards. But it doesn't hurt to provide them with some UV, but being a nocturnal lizard, you might argue, a bit like geckos, that certainly show that they can survive quite healthily and quite well without the provision of UV light. But it's something that doesn't hurt to have it there. Obviously, it's not going to hurt them. Don't know if there's really a lot else to talk about in regards to these guys, but if it's something that has sparked your interest, and I've got a bunch of these at home, which will probably make their way into the store before too long if we do get an expressions of interest in these magnificent little guys. We still have 4 here that are 12 months old, if that's more appealing. But I've got, as I said, I've got 20 odd of these little guys to find homes for, and it just might be something that you perhaps hadn't thought of previously. Hopefully what I've explained today and shown you might just give you the urge to indulge in something a little bit different. So thank you for your time.